Namaskar, my name is RAMESH BJONNES, and I'm going to talk today about Tantra and sustainability. And before we get started with that, I want to give a little introduction to myself and why I'm talking about this, talk a little bit about my own path of Tantra, and also my work in terms of sustainability and environmental activism. So basically, we are going to talk about two different subjects and also how these subjects, these topics are interlinked, which is Tantra as practice and Tantra as worldview. So let's go back to my early 20s when I was living in Norway. I was living on an island. I grew up in a family that was rather unusual because my grandfather was a preacher and my father and mother, they were socialists, communists. And so our household was rather unusual in that sense because there was a lot of disagreement in terms of issues, in terms of lifestyle and so on and so forth, as you can imagine. But in retrospect, I have found over the years that growing up in that environment actually fed, in some ways, both my spiritual side and my activist side. And so at the same time, as I was growing up, Norway and many of the Scandinavian countries at that time were rather sustainable as compared to today. For example, most of the people in my neighborhood grew their own fruits and vegetables in their backyard. Fathers went fishing. And so people lived quite sustainably. In the middle of this haven, in many ways, compared to how many people live today, I became an activist. First a socialist, and then I became a green activist, and I started to study agronomy, and I became part of the first group of people in Norway and perhaps in Europe at the time that moved from the city into the countryside and started to farm and do organic farming. So this was unusual because when we look at the same people today, where my mother now lives, she still lives in the same house. Nobody is growing apples or vegetables in their backyard anymore. That's been completely wiped out. So in a period in which we have started to talk a lot about the environment and to buy green and eat organic and so on, in many ways, the overall environment has gone down the tube, so to speak, or become much worse. This is a very important issue to grasp, that buying green, buying organic is not enough. And as a matter of fact, the more whole food stores we have gotten, the worse the environment has become. This is an important insight. Now, during this same time, as I was finishing my degree in agronomy, I moved onto a farm with my girlfriend at that time, and we were running a dairy farm. And during that period, I was introduced to Tantra. A friend of mine came up from Oslo, up into the mountains where I was running this farm, and taught me meditation. During that same period, I was reading Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and was very inspired, and had given up this idea that socialism was going to change the world, because I started to realize the problems with materialism, the problems with having an ideology that did not include spirituality as a path and spirituality as a worldview. So when I was introduced to Tantric yoga through my friend who taught me a very simple meditation technique, my life, my personal life, my internal life was transformed quite radically. And prior to that, I had dabbled a little bit in yoga, studying from books and so on, and learning mostly asanas from books. But also I had a very mystical experience one day when this very strange mantra popped into my head and I started repeating it. The mantra that my friend gave me was different, but then later on he introduced me to a Swami or an Avadut, a Tantric yogi from India. And to my great surprise, he gave me the same mantra, although a little different, but the same mantra that popped into my head. He adjusted some of the spelling and the way to use it on the breath and so on. But it was a remarkable experience, and it really transformed my understanding of reality. So, how to reconcile the interior Tantra, the subjective Tantra, with what we may call the objective Tantra, or the interior spirituality and the exterior spirituality, or the objective form of spirituality. This, I think, is crucial now at this pivotal stage in human development, in human history, to understand, because, as we know, there are so many serious, globally serious environmental problems facing us. And so I feel very strongly that what is needed now more than ever is a spiritual worldview that is coupled with a socially conscious, environmentally conscious worldview. This interface, this relationship is incredibly important, more than ever. So I am going to just read what sustainability is and what most people in the economic field and in the sustainability field thinks what sustainability is. In 1987, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who used to be the Prime Minister of Norway, headed a commission in the United Nations, and they came up with this term about sustainability that has become the standard. And this term says that sustainability is the development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So, human needs are many. But what is important to understand regarding this term sustainability in the context of the United Nations and in the context of economics is that it only talks about human needs, and it is framed in a materialistic framework. And in economic terms, it is framed within a capitalist framework. In other words, the people that frame this term, develop this term, they feel, at least they felt at that time, that capitalism is the only economic system that we have, and if we adjust capitalism, we can save the planet. We can make this planet greener so that it meets the needs of the future generations. That is their understanding. My understanding is very, very different. I don't agree with that at all. So I want to take us a little further back into history and introduce Carl Polanyi, an economist who wrote a book called The Great Transformation in the 1940s. I think it was in 1948. And Carl Polanyi at that time, long before another pivotal green economist, sustainable economist came on the scene, Schumacher, and we'll get back to him in a few minutes. He came on the scene very early on, and he said that the problem with capitalism and the problem with Western civilization in general is the commodification of nature. The turning of nature into a commodity, a thing to be exploited, utilized, sold, made into profit. Now, we know that the central ethics, the central philosophy of capitalism is profit, maximum profit. This is the driving force of capitalism. And this is also the driving force between the driving force behind the plunder of nature. This is what has gotten us into trouble. This driving selfish force of capitalism for profit. This has driven the planet towards ruin. It has given us immense environmental problems. And we don't need to go into any details because most people are now aware of many of the environmental problems that we're dealing with. So I have come up with a different term just as actually as part of this presentation. It is a rough draft, one may say, but it is different than the term sustainability that the Brundtland Commission came up with. And my concept of sustainability is this. I call it spiritual sustainability, and it is development based on the ecological principles of nature to meet the physical, mental, and spiritual needs of people at present and the future. The problem that Polanyi pointed out, that we have commodified nature, is pivotal in understanding, and pivotal in understanding sustainability and any kind of green thinking. Because we all depend on the biosphere. We all depend on nature. In capitalism, in the capitalist framework, nature is a subsection of economics. But Polanyi and other green thinkers point out that it should be the other way around. The economics is a subsection of nature. Because we depend on nature for all the resources. Just like we yogis depend on our body to become more limber, to adjust our body and to make our hormones more harmonious, our lymphatic system drain properly, and so on and so forth, so that we can sit in proper asana when we do meditation. So we depend on the body. We are the body. And here I want to introduce Abhinava Gupta's, the Tantric guru, teacher, master, Abhinava Gupta, and his concept of Jagat Ananda, which is that the world is the world bliss, that the self is the world. This is a beautiful concept, and it is as anti-materialistic as it can get. And this is what is so important, I think, with Tantra as a worldview, because Tantra offers something really unique. And now, from Polanyi and from sustainable development, from sustainable economics, I want to move into the Tantric realm for a little while. So, Tantra is a very unique philosophy. And if we look at the context of Indian philosophy, Indian spirituality, and we can focus on two important paths of spirituality in India, Vedanta on the one hand, and Tantra on the other. They're both non-dualistic philosophies. They're both non-dualistic practices. But Vedanta, at least one important form of Vedanta, says that this world is an illusion. What is important is Brahman. What is important is the spirit, and to become one with the spirit. So we could say in general terms that this path of asceticism is a path of renouncing the world, of giving up the world and retreating into the mountains, to the jungle, into a cave, focus on meditation and your own liberation. And that's really all that matters. Now, this path, we could also call this the ascending path, the path that in Western terms, or Western Christian terms, would be the path that takes us all to heaven. It doesn't matter, you're a sinner, doesn't matter so much, as long as you believe in this path, Christ, or whatever teacher, and that teacher, this path can take you into heaven, into the spirit realm. You can negate the world. That is not so important. Tantra has a very different worldview. Tantra says, yes, there is only spirit. There is only ultimate truth. But there is also relative truth. There is this body. You are in this body. You meditate using this body. You live in this world. And in Tantra, we have this beautiful concept of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva as consciousness and Shakti as energy, or Purusha and Prakriti. And for those of you who are interested in spiritual philosophy, Indian philosophy, you all know that those terms are also called Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha being Shiva and Prakriti being Shakti. Now, my teacher, my guru, Sri Shananandamurti, who many of you may not know, although he's well known in India now, especially these days, but he's not so well known outside of India. He has a term, Sanskrit sutra, which is Shiva Shakti Atmakam Brahma. Shiva Shakti Atmakam Brahma. That means that Brahma is the composite of Shiva and Shakti. In other words, the ultimate reality, the non-dual reality, has two potentials, two inherent potentials. One is consciousness, pure consciousness, which is Brahman, and the other, Shakti, which is the energy, the energetic principle, the creative principle, that which creates the world, that which from where the world comes from. And so in English terms, we could say that Vedanta, or sort of traditional Vedanta, the ascetic form of Vedanta, is non-dualism. Brahman is all there is. The rest is an illusion. And of course, if that is our worldview, then we would tend to negate the world and not care. Exploitation, rape, war, who cares? As long as, I can have my cave and my spiritual liberation. Who cares about that? I am not saying by any means that all Vedantic practitioner believers are today following this path. I'm not saying that, because many, and perhaps most, Vedantic modern practitioners have a similar understanding to these things now as we have in Tantra. But that is the great contribution into Indian philosophy from Tantra. This understanding of the interconnection between dualism and non-dualism. That, yes, there are two realities, the ultimate, the spiritual, and the relative, the Shakti level, or the energetic level from which the world is created.